Would the congregation please rise? Would the congregation please be seated? Good afternoon. My name is Garth Coop. I am son number 5 to Mel and Mary. I also am one of the pastors here at Steinbach EMC, and it's great to have so many faces here, so many people here to celebrate Dad's life this afternoon. You are an encouragement to us this afternoon. Some of you have come because you know Dad or knew Dad. Perhaps you knew him from church, maybe the church that you attended and he was a pastor at. Perhaps you know him that way, and you heard him speak about Jesus many times in that setting. Some of you maybe know Dad because you were hitchhiking, and Dad picked you up, and he shared Jesus with you there. And it's good to have you here this afternoon as well. For others of you, I know that are here, you played hockey with Dad, and you probably were on the receiving end of a slash. And on your way to the penalty box, he probably shared Jesus with you. And so that's why you're here this afternoon. Maybe you know Mom, maybe from her work at the thrift store or at Clear Spring Mall many years ago. And so you're coming this afternoon in support of her, and that's a good reason to be here this afternoon. And then there's others, of course, here that are here because you know one of us 5 boys. And those are all very good reasons. Maybe you came this afternoon because you heard that there was a free meal afterwards, and that is very good too. As Dad would say, and as we as his family would say, you are welcome here. For whatever reason, you are here, and whatever brings you here, you are welcome in this place. And we are so glad you chose to be here this afternoon when there are so many other things that you could be doing. You're going to hear lots about Dad this afternoon, lots of different perspectives. Some will make you laugh. Perhaps some will make you cry. And there might be even an occasion where you will want to yell out, "Hallelujah, amen." And we just want to say, do that as you feel led. We want to invite you after the conclusion of the service to join us in the fellowship hall afterwards for a light meal together, where you will have opportunities and we will have opportunities to mix with one another and to hear stories and to share memories and all of that stuff together. If you knew Dad, you knew that Dad loved he had a relationship with Jesus Christ that was first and center in his life. If you knew Dad and you spent time with him, you would know that his passion for the Word was very strong. He was a man after God's heart. He was a man who was very disciplined in his daily reading and in memorizing Scripture. And for me, that was impressed upon my heart very early in life. I remember a time in grade 7, and for those of you that are part of our church, you've probably heard this story from me a time or two before. But I was in grade 7, and I was trying out for a AAA hockey team in Abbotsford, BC. And after the second or third tryout, the coach pulled me aside, and he said, "Coop, here's the deal. I know that your dad hasn't allowed you to play hockey on Sundays in the past. And with this team, there'll be lots of traveling on the weekends, and you will be playing lots of hockey on Sundays. If your dad allows you to play, you have a spot on the team. But if he doesn't, then tomorrow night will be your last tryout." So he said, "You need to go home, you need to have a conversation with your dad and see what he has to say, and then come back tomorrow and let me know." And so I did that. I went home that night wondering if I should actually mention it to Dad, because I knew he'd say no. But I decided, well, I'm going to ask anyway. Dad didn't say no, at least not outright like that. Dad said, "Garth, if you want to play on this team, I'll make you a deal. Because I know that you're going to be missing lots of hockey or lots of church on Sundays, I want you to know, Garth, that it's great to love hockey. It's great to love the game. But number one, for you to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And that would be your priority in life. And one of the ways that we can do that to get to know Christ better is to be in the Word." And so he said, "Garth, here's the deal I'm willing to make with you. If you would read one proverb a day, that means that you would get through the book of Proverbs every month. Do you still want to play hockey?" I thought, one chapter a day? Yeah, I'll do that, Dad. And I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Dad said, "Well, in addition to that one proverb a day, I want you to read 5 Psalms a day. You still want to play hockey, Garth?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, I really do." But I was starting to add it up, and I thought, 6 chapters a day? Oh, boy, that's going to take me about an hour. I said, "Dad, I still want to play." I should have known it wasn't that easy. Dad said, "Well, in addition to those 6 chapters a day, I'm going to give you chapters or verses in the Scriptures to memorize. In fact, we're going to memorize that together. We're going to start on Sunday, and then the following Sunday, we're going to recite those verses to each other. Garth, do you still want to play hockey?" Dad, you know what? I have a little bit of Mel in me too. And there's hardly a challenge that I don't want to accept. And so I said, "Yeah, Dad, I still want to play hockey, and I'll do that." Today, I'm thankful that Dad did not back down. I'm thankful that Dad stuck to his guns and he stuck to his commitment and held me to that commitment throughout the year. Because there were days, there were weeks, there were many moments when I would break down in tears and say, "Dad, I can't do this, I don't want to do this." And he kept saying, "Keep going." I'm thankful to my dad that he taught me discipline. Hebrews 12, verse 11 says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained in it." Psalm 121, Mom asked if I would read that one. It was one of Dad's favorites. It's one that we memorized that year also, but I don't remember it completely today. But it says this, "I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore." Over the previous days, we've had lots of tributes. Things have been texted, emailed, put on Facebook, and so on and so forth. Before we have a song, or before we're led in a congregational song, I want to read a tribute from my Auntie Lorraine. She wrote this. Mel entered my life years before I knew he would someday be my brother-in-law. As a teenager on the fringes of church life, he was my youth leader during my high school years. I was not somebody who readily shared what I was going through, yet somehow he was the person I came to trust. It seemed there wasn't too much a person could say to him that would shock him or make him think less of you. Gradually, he got to know our family, my parents, Jake and Eva, and us 5 children. When my mom needed encouragement, she found this in conversations with Mel. Mel became one of the first church people to start a relationship with my dad. During those years, my dad was choosing his own path, and this did not include God or church. Since Mel lived and breathed to introduce people to Jesus, my dad seemed a perfect fit for someone Mel wanted to get to know. Where someone would have been intimidated by my dad, Mel was gutsy and completely unafraid. In the meantime, Charlie, one of Mel's younger brothers, had accepted Christ and made a radical change in his life. In a conversation with Charlie shortly after this decision, Mel mentioned that he knew the perfect girl to ask out for a date. That person happened to be me. I was always humbled by the fact that Mel thought so highly of me, despite how messed up my world sometimes was. Charlie, on the other hand, thought Mel was crazy for thinking he would randomly call up a stranger and ask her for a date. This only happened sometime later when we met at SBC. Yes, we started dating, and when we got engaged, it seemed natural to me to ask Mel to perform our wedding on December of 1978. It was also no surprise to me that almost 10 years later, when my dad became very convicted to accept Christ, Mel was the person he invited to the house. Dad always said that admitting his wrongs and changing his life's direction was the hardest decision he ever made. I think Mel was probably the only person strong and firm enough to get him through that. Mel also helped Dad write out his first ever testimony. In the months following, Mel and Mary spent time with my parents and led a Bible study in my parents' home. These were all things I had often wondered if I would live to see. These events caused a seismic shift in our family, and Mel was there through it all. Our children certainly got to know Uncle Mel. In Scott's words, I appreciated that Mel and Mary were willing to host me in their home when I traveled to Manitoba on my own for work. Though Uncle Mel had so many other people in his life, along with many nieces and nephews, he was still ready to visit and share about life and ministry with me. His energy, friendliness, and unwavering passion for the Lord are things I continue to remember and thank God for. I'm so thankful for my brother-in-law Mel. I'm saddened by his death and for the sorrow you as a family will be going through in the coming days and months. I realize, however, that there is also joy, because this event has transported him to the culmination of everything he lived and worked for, his forever life with Jesus. Sister-in-law, Lorraine Coop. Ernie and Lorraine, would you?
Turn our hymn books to song number 190. I know whom I have believed. We'll sing verses 1, 2, and 4. Song number 190.
Christ in love redeemed.
to live against God.
Hi, my name's Howard. I'm the oldest of Melvin and Mary's sons and kids. Melvin Coop, age 83 years. of Steinbeck passed away on Thursday, January 16th, 2020, peacefully surrounded by his family at Bethesda Hospital. Dad was born November 25th, 1936. He was the third oldest of 17 children. He married our mother, Mary Fast, on September 12, 1959, in the Kleefeld EMC. They spent over 60 years together and had 5 sons: Howard, his wife Jane, Barry, his wife Tracy, Myron, his wife Susan, Conroy, his wife Sheila, and Garth, his wife Carly. Dad pastored churches in Flin Flon, Winnipeg, Steinbeck, Abbotsford, Swift Current, and NOLA, Menville, and Morris. As a young man, Dad worked at Schomburg's grocery store, in the Verdant oil fields, Coldstream Refrigeration, and Barkman Concrete in Winnipeg. Dad dedicated his life to Christ at 18 years old on his own after being invited and encouraged to consider Christ by a close friend. Shortly after, he enrolled at Steinbeck Bible School. 2 significant life decisions occurred there. He felt a calling to ministry, and he started dating and eventually married our mom, Mary Fast. Their initial plan was to go into foreign missions. However, Dad's health issues at the time prevented them from traveling overseas. Instead, they went north to Flin Flon to plant the Northern Fellowship Church. There, the 2 oldest sons were born. After 5 years in Flin Flon, Dad and Mom moved to Winnipeg for Dad to further his education at Mennonite Brethren Bible College and pastor the emerging Crestview Fellowship Church. Here, the next 2 sons were added to the family. These were busy times for Dad with 4 boys, attending college, pastoring a church, and tiring roofs to supplement his income. His sense of purpose and passion for the church kept him motivated. In 1971, Dad accepted the youth pastor position at the Steinbeck Evangelical Mennonite Church. Soon after moving to Steinbeck, their 5th son was born. Dad had a vibrant youth group called Christian Youth Fellowship. CYF retreats at Camp Jubilee, flea markets, prison ministry, and Tuesday night Bible studies built a strong community for the young people. In addition to pastoring, Dad was involved in the community, coaching his son's hockey teams and volunteering as a parole officer. Later, Dad spent 5 years as the Manitoba and Saskatchewan regional rep for World Vision. Dad loved the opportunity to expand his network of friends and raise funds for and awareness of world hunger. Dad accepted the senior pastor position at the Grace Evangelical Church in Abbotsford in 1981. He had a highly effective outreach in the community, which brought many new people to faith and discipleship in the church. In 1986, the Steinbeck EMC invited him back to associate pastor. Dad was enticed by the position, along with the opportunity to be near to family and lifelong friends. The combination of being rooted in the church and outreach opportunities in the broader community kept Dad engaged in this ministry for 13 years. Retirement in 1999 was short-lived. Dad was drawn to a series of interim pastoral positions to assist churches in transition. These churches were in Swift Current, Anola, Menville, and Morris. Mom and Dad made many more friends in each church. Dad had a passion for reading and was disciplined with his daily devotions, prayer life, scripture memorization, and physical exercise. One of Dad's great athletic achievements was running the Manitoba Marathon at age 70. Dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2018. As his memory deteriorated, Mom was always by his side, ready to help Her love, kindness, and patience were honoring and respectful toward Dad all his life, and especially in his last years. Dad leaves to mourn his loving wife, Mary, 5 boys and their spouses, 20 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren, 7 brothers, 8 sisters, and a large extended family. We as a family wish to express our gratitude to the staff at Bethesda Hospital for caring for Dad in the last month. If friends so desire, in lieu of flowers, donations in memory of Melvin Coop may be made to Evangelical Mennonite Conference Missions.
Hi. For those of you who don't know, I'm Joel Jolly, and up until very recently, I was the worship arts director here. Mel was someone I always appreciated when he came in because he always had something kind to say. Sometimes it was funny, and then not always as kind when it was funny, but things are kind of okay that way. Garth has been my co-worker for over 3 years, and when he asked me to come sing at his dad's funeral, I couldn't say no. Sort of memorial service. Anyways. To the river I am going, bringing sins I cannot bear. Come and cleanse me, come forgive me. Lord, I need to meet you there. In these waters, healing mercies flows with freedom from despair. I am going to that river. Lord, I need to meet you there. Precious Jesus, I am ready to surrender every care. Take my hand now, lead me closer. Lord, I need to meet you there. Come and join us in that river. Come find life beyond compare. He is calling, he is waiting. Jesus longs to meet you there. Precious Jesus, I am ready to surrender every care. Take my hand now, lead me closer. Lord, I need to meet you there. Take my hand now, lead me closer. Lord, I need to meet you there.
everyone. My name's Amber, one of his many grandchildren. It's awesome to see all the lives that he's impacted here today. So I'm just going to share a little bit here, a little tribute. So I remember when Grandpa would always ask me to read sections from the Bible or with other, or through like other readings, whether it be during Christmas gatherings, Thanksgiving gatherings, or just during the nightly Bible readings. So that's why I thought it'd be appropriate for me to read for and to him one last time. Dear Grandpa, what we lack in pictures together, we make up for in the memories we made together. I have no words to express exactly how I'm feeling, how many times tears were shed, how many memories I have, whether they be good or bad, whether we butt heads with things said or done, or when we shared laughter and love. My first memory of you is about 20 years ago. I would have been in grade 1, and you were either helping me with schoolwork or we were just looking through class photos. My last memory of you just goes back about 3 weeks ago, a few days after Christmas. I went to visit you in the hospital for the first time, and I said, "I miss you, Grandpa." And you replied back with, "I miss you too." Not sure if you even realized who I was, but it still meant a lot just hearing those words. Those were my last words to you. I initially didn't even want to go to the hospital and see you in that state, and thought I would just see you when you got out. And I was holding on to that hope until it hit me that you weren't going to get out. I'll miss the times when you would call for Grandma, but she couldn't hear you as she was either downstairs or in the bathroom, and you wouldn't stop calling for her until I told you she wasn't around. Or I tell Grandma that you were calling for her if her and I were together. Every little thing reminds me of you. This all feels like it happened too fast. I was expecting you to first get home care and then go into the old folks' home with Grandma, but this just goes to show that sometimes life doesn't always go as planned. I missed your laughter, your super loud sneezes that always made me jump, the way you'd make noises and clap at the crows or cats in the backyard so they wouldn't scare off the other nice birds. I miss your singing voice and the fact that gospel music always seemed to have to be playing, and that you always tickled my feet when they were hanging off the couch. I miss the way you answered the phone with an abrupt hello. I remember the times you'd ask me to type up your sermons, and in turn you'd give me a little something. Was never asked for, but it was definitely appreciated. I'll also miss your little quirks, like how you just randomly start humming, and the famous phrase you'd always use, "good night." I'll miss you constantly telling me to turn off the lights if I'm not in the room, or telling me to wipe around the bathroom sink so there aren't any water droplets. I'll miss how when we went out for supper, I got so impatient with how slow you ate your food, and then you said to me that I should slow down and savor the food. And the same could be said about life, to slow down and savor the moments you have with people. Or how when we went out to eat, there wouldn't be a time that went by where someone didn't come and say hi to us, or you'd stop to chat a bit with people while Grandma and I waited in the car for you to come. Having patience was a must when it came to going anywhere with you. I'll miss bringing you and Grandma coffee, trying to do it at least once a week in the last few months here. She would get a medium half decaf and half French vanilla, while I would just get you a medium black coffee because you liked having a certain amount of milk, so then you could just add in as much as you wanted. It was also awesome how welcoming you were to everyone. When Jane and her kids became a part of our family 14 years ago, you and Grandma both just naturally welcomed them in with open arms and open hearts, going as far as getting them Christmas gifts or just welcoming them to Regina each and every Thanksgiving, and which was a tradition for about 22 years. Regina was also a great memory that I will miss sharing with you. How full of energy and life you were, going to the park with the entire Coop bunch, including uncles and aunts and cousins. And you were also in there aggressively playing football with your sons and grandchildren. But most importantly, I'll miss you, Grandpa. How stubborn, old-fashioned, lovable, generous, gracious, and caring you were. I will love you forever and always. This isn't goodbye. This is see you later.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick, and this is my cousin Rylan. We're up here this afternoon to share about our wonderful grandpa, Mel Coop. Several of us cousins have accurately labeled as the grandkids, have compiled some of our favorite memories and characteristics of our grandpa. For myself, having sleepovers at Grandpa and Grandma's are memories that will stick with me throughout the rest of my life. Among with hanging out with the cousins and having my fair share of Grandma's baking, the Mikey and Jackie stories Grandpa told before bed really tied the whole visit together. Without me even realizing, Grandpa was able to have a meaningful impact on my life through storytelling, scripture reading, leading by example, and countless other ways. My brother Thomas said, Grandpa was always an exceptional man who was great with people. Even living in Winnipeg, I would frequently run into people who had known him. He lived his life with great vigor and a sense of adventure. He was devoted to his family and to the Lord. One of my favorite memories was whenever we would leave Grandpa and Grandma's house as children, Grandpa would give us a big hug so tight that it would hurt and a big kiss that would burn because of his stubble. Now I'm sure that when I get to heaven, I will be greeted with that same hug and kiss. Shanley said, no matter what or where you were with Grandpa, he would always be ready to play a card game, crokinole, or backgammon. Close enough. Savannah said, I didn't get to live in the same city as Grandpa, but he was present for so many special events. Grandpa was a great encourager and celebrator. Grandma and Grandpa visited at summer camps, graduations, and birthdays with words of wisdom and encouragement. The 16-hour drive didn't keep them from having a loving relationship. Grandpa lived a life of discipline and surrender to the Lord. I am beyond grateful for the spiritual blessing I've received through the Lord's faithfulness to him. I'm inspired by his life to share the good news with confidence. My sister Mallory said, Grandpa was the kind of person who made you feel like you were the most important person in the room, no matter who you were. I spent January and February of 2019 at Grandpa and Grandma's house as I was completing an internship at the Hanover School Division. Some days, Grandpa would know me well, and some days he would not. But regardless of what he knew about me in that moment, he always made an effort to ask me questions and to get to know me in such a meaningful way. The connections he made with people are something that I will never forget.
So I'm Rylan, like Nick said, and oftentimes when we'd go to Grandpa's house or Grandpa and Grandma's, we'd walk in the door and within 3 seconds Grandma would say, shut the door, it's cold. So that was always a pleasant memory going in there. So my brother Tyson said, my favorite memory with Grandpa was waking up early in the morning to nobody in the house awake except for Grandpa reading his Bible and doing devotions in his office in the morning. Grandpa would welcome me into his office and read the Bible with me and memorize verses. When he finished his devotions, he did his morning workout routine that consisted of push-ups, jumping jacks, and lots of stretching. I could never keep up with him. Travis said, my favorite memory with Grandpa was driving through Calgary to Fairmont, and I loved the long drives with him. Joe said, my favorite memories with Grandpa was a few summers back when I lived here in Steinbach. Every day, Grandpa and Grandma would get up with me for work, read the Daily Bread, and have breakfast. After work, Grandpa was always willing to play a game of pool and then take me out to the golf course. But of course, it was never just a game for him. He was only there to beat me as bad as he could. He was a man who always loved people and did things to the best of his ability. His faithfulness to his family and the Lord were incredible and inspiring. And Cousin Brock said, my favorite memory was playing hockey in the cul-de-sac at Grandpa and Grandma's. And mine was, for the past few years, I've been known as a lawnmower to Grandpa, as I'd come each week to mow the lawn, and then after sit on the porch with him and usually have a Pepsi. And then oftentimes Grandpa would say, so how much do I owe you? And I'd say, well, whatever you want, Grandpa. And he says, well, then nothing. So oftentimes I walked out of there with nothing. I always knew I had a safe place with Grandpa. He encouraged me, pushed me, and taught me to love the Lord with all my heart. He has and will always be a role model in my life. Thanks for listening.
I'm going to need a tissue. There isn't any up here. Hello. My name is Carly, and I'm one of Mom and Dad's long-awaited daughters. And after all the shenanigans of those Coop boys, all of us daughters were welcomed by Mom and Dad with open arms. And those arms of Dad certainly gave the most bone-crunching hugs. This is according to the men in my life. I always got his daughter hugs, which involved a little whisper in the ear, saying, welcome here, glad to see you, or I love you. He might not have raised any girls in his home, but he certainly knew how to love us. I know I was treasured by Dad, like one of his own girls, and I shall especially miss the Sunday morning hugs in the church foyer, where I would search for his face and our eyes would meet. I'd make a beeline for him and I would get that hug. Most of my life as one of Dad's girls, our time was segmented into week-long visits, as we lived quite far away to the last 5.5 years. But when Mom and Dad would visit us, you could always be sure to see Dad arrive on the front step of our house, wherever we were, with his trusty olive green briefcase, bursting at the seams with books. Not one or two. Usually he was working on about 5 or 6 books at one time. And no matter whatever time we got up, Dad was already up, sitting in our living room reading, surrounded by a pile of books, with his Bible sitting in his lap. And Dad was very consistent with his exercising. Every single morning would start with Bible reading, prayer, push-ups, and sit-ups. And I can remember Tyson and Rylan coming up the stairs more than a few times when Mom and Dad would be visiting after they'd done their Bible reading and stretching with Dad. And no matter where Mom and Dad were, they always had their 10 p.m. reading time that we were able to participate in. Consistent time with Jesus and with Mom. That's what Dad was about. And as Dad's memory started to fade, they'd be at our house for dinner and he would say, Mary, we need to make sure we're home to do our 10 p.m. reading time. One of the things we looked forward to when we moved to Steinbach was the fact that Tyson and Rylan would finally have some grandparents close by to come cheer at their hockey games, ball games, and track meets. And for a few years, Dad was a staple at the boys' games and events. I'd often find him and Mom already sitting in the stands when we'd get to the rink. They were always nice and early. I will miss sitting with Dad and answering all of his questions about the games. Dad always bought 50-50 tickets. Every single game he'd say, I'll take $5 worth, Carly, and when I win, we're going for dinner. We'd then have a big conversation about whether it was Dairy Queen or A&W. I don't think Dad ever actually won a 50-50, but sometimes we'd go celebrate anyways with burgers and ice cream. Now, Dad was an avid hockey fan, but I don't think he was a great appreciator of a noisy hockey fan. As I look back now, he was often strategic as where he would sit in the arena. Sometimes it would be, maybe this period you could sit on this side of me, Carly? Or, politely, do you really need to ring that bell so much? Until one game he actually asked for the bell, and I handed it over to see what he would do. And he did use it once, and then he tucked it away out of my sight. Dad would celebrate the wins with Tyson and Rylan and encourage them in the losses, and he was always interested in whatever his grandkids did. And when you arrived at the front door of Mom and Dad's house, it usually involved Dad swinging the door wide open with a smile and saying, welcome here, I'm so glad you came. That was a good part of Mom and Dad's, but the best part of Mom and Dad's has to be their living room. It is one of the most peaceful places on the planet. And I believe it has a lot to do with the fact that it was a prayer room of sorts, filled with the faithful prayers of Mom and Dad. It has a holy presence to it, and it should be, considering it's been consistently filled with prayer for over the last 30 years. When Mom and Dad said they were praying about it, you knew it was getting a lot of airtime in front of God. Always felt a peace about things when you ask Mom and Dad to pray for something. It could also explain why that room ended up being a nap zone for anybody who ever came over to the house. Guaranteed there was always someone laying out on the floor having a nap. And when you'd leave Mom and Dad's, you'd be sure to see Dad in the window with his hand in the air waving goodbye. And it's genetic because that's what his dad did. I have a few photos of Dad that are my favorite. They were in the slideshow earlier. One of him at Thanksgiving in Regina, going down the water slide, head first, with the hugest smile on his face, in the middle of all the grandkids. Dad was an all-in kind of guy. Whether it was playing sports with his boys or his grandkids, singing, meeting new people, or telling other people about Jesus, Dad made the most of every opportunity. But Dad and I had our philosophical differences. To this day, I do not understand his passion for ketchup. I remember the very first time I saw him desecrate a steak. I had lovingly prepared delicious barbecue for my father-in-law and mother-in-law. And I was confused why he was asking for the ketchup, thinking maybe it was for the potatoes. I do remember gasping audibly when he smothered that beautiful juicy steak with ketchup. Dad loved his ketchup. We actually had ketchup with our soup today. And last night around the dinner table, it's genetic, the grandkids had ketchup in their food. I also had to bite my tongue frequently when playing card games with Dad. He would be oh so patiently waiting, quietly tapping his finger on the table, waiting for my turn to finish. And then when it was his turn, he would take all day long. And there'd be a twinkle in his eye when I would point it out to him. Clearly, some of us had some competitive issues with Dad, but that just made the games a little more fun. And I remember the very first time I played a game of cards with Dad. I'd put down the wrong card, and I said, "Can I change it?" And Dad said, "Nope, Carly, a card laid is a card played." Right from day one, I knew it was going to be interesting. Dad also put up politely with my need to have windows and doors open at our house. Those open doors meant there were more than a few flies in the house. But I like to think that I gave Dad an activity to do when he was visiting our house. He would find the fly swatter, wander around the house, visiting and attacking any fly he could find. And while he was doing that, he also took it upon himself to monitor all the light switches and would turn them off anytime he saw fit. No fly left behind seemed to be his motto. There is another photo in the slideshow that brings tears to my eyes every time I see it. It's one of Dad sitting in his green office chair, reading his Bible early one morning, with Tyson sitting in his lap. That is one of Tyson's favorite memories and will always be one of mine. That was who Dad was, bringing people, in this case his grandson, to meet Jesus, no matter the time or the place. That explains Dad in a nutshell. I will always say with pride that I'm one of your kids, Dad. Thank you for loving us all so well, for being half of one of the most godly marriages I've ever witnessed, for showing us Jesus and modeling daily how to love God and to love others. The Apostle Paul said, "But my life is worth nothing to me unless I use it for finishing the work assigned me by the Lord Jesus, the work of telling others the good news about the wonderful grace of God." Dad, your life was full. We will miss you so much, and we cannot wait to see you again. You aren't just my father-in-law, but you're my dad. And I'm so looking forward to that hug of yours in heaven.
Good afternoon. I'm Myron, number 3. This is Conroy, number 4. Dad grew up in Kleefeld and attended the Kleefeld Evangelical Mennonite Church throughout his childhood and youth. He was small but competitive, and he loved to run. When he sprinted, his short legs were a blur as they turned over at seemingly 1,000 RPMs. In his early school years, his brother Harry and sisters Rosella and Lenora would enter as many school races as possible: the 50-yard dash, gunny sack, wheelbarrow, three-legged. This was because the first place prize was 3 oranges, second place 2 oranges, and third place 1 orange. Auntie Lenora tells us that they always came home with a car full of oranges. Dad dedicated his life to Christ at 18 years old on his own after being invited and encouraged to consider Christ by a close friend. Later, with the encouragement of another close but older friend, Arnold Fast, Dad enrolled at Steinbach Bible School to train for pastoral ministry. There, he started dating and eventually proposed to Mary Fast. On September 12, 1959, 5 months after he proposed, Dad and Mom were married. Together, they embarked upon a lifetime of pastoral ministry. First in Flin Flon, Manitoba, where Dad planted and pastored the Northern Fellowship Chapel.
After 5 years in the birth of their first 2 sons, Howard and Barry, they moved to Winnipeg to pastor the Crestview Fellowship Church. To supplement his pastor's income, Dad tarred roofs in the summer months. For these 5 years, they lived in a church basement suite. Although the suite was small, the other parts of the church provided ample space for Dad and his 4 sons to explore, play ball hockey, hide and seek, and just run around and burn off some energy. Here in the church parking lot, Dad made the first of many backyard winter rinks to ensure that his boys would have at least one healthy outlet for their energy. Living on a pastor's wage from a young, small, but growing church, Mom and Dad had very little discretionary money. Still, they managed to find us used skates. One day, to our delight, Dad even brought home 4 small and brand new straight blade Victoriaville hockey sticks and a sponge puck from Canadian Tire. This planted the seeds for a lifelong love of hockey in his boys, a gift that we still enjoy to this day.
Mom and Dad's attachments to the people in Crestview must have been deep. I was only 5, but I still distinctly recall him crying as he stood behind the pulpit to bid goodbye to the church in the spring of 1971. After those 5 years in Crestview, Mom and Dad moved to Steinbach for Dad to become youth pastor here at the Steinbach Evangelical Mennonite Church. And here, their 5th son was born. The quiver was full. Dad led a large and active youth ministry that attracted and included all kinds of people from the community. At Steinbach EMC, with Dad in his 30s, he further cultivated his relationship with Arnold Fast, who was then the senior pastor of the church. Later in life, Dad told us that Arnold Fast was one of his mentors.
We remember a continuous stream of visitors to our home during this time. People young and old from all different backgrounds: Winnipeggers, Indigenous, Americans, ventriloquists, missionaries, traveling evangelists, radio show hosts like Mel Johnson from Tips for Teens, hitchhikers, and many others. Many stayed for dinners or Sunday lunch. Mom always had roast beef and potatoes on the table. And occasionally for night, We had no idea where they could have slept, but I'm sure Mom found a comfortable place for each one of them.
Dad always engaged with people. One day, a young man, Dave, came from Winnipeg to repair the Gestetner machine at the church. Dad, naturally curious about people, struck up a conversation and then a friendship with the young repairman. A few days later, Dave, who naturally was over for dinner, shared the news that with Dad's guidance, he had accepted Christ into his life earlier that day. Because of Dad's passion for Christ, belief in the power of the gospel to transform lives, and his genuine love for and interest in people, this type of experience in our home was not unusual.
Dad had convictions, and very strong ones at that. In the 1970s, Steinbach had a referendum on allowing the sale of alcohol within town limits. Dad held the belief that Christians should abstain from alcohol, and this belief was reinforced through seeing firsthand the effects of excessive alcohol consumption on young people and their families through his pastoral work, prison ministry, and volunteer role as a parole officer. This conviction led Dad to the forefront of the no side, even appearing on television in Winnipeg and radio stations to defend his position. Steinbach has changed significantly since the 1970s, but in that referendum, the town voted against allowing the sale of alcohol.
After 5 years as a youth pastor, Dad accepted the position of Saskatchewan and Manitoba Regional Rep for World Vision. In this role, Dad was able to exercise his adventurous side. He traveled extensively in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but also beyond to Toronto, Vancouver, Los Angeles, Haiti, and Colombia. Upon his return from these trips, he always said he was glad to have Mom's cooking instead of restaurant food.
There was one trip to Los Angeles, however, where Dad did get some home-cooked meals. On the flight to Los Angeles, Dad was served his meal with a cherry tomato as a garnish. He had never seen a cherry tomato before, and he bit right into it. Dad scored a direct hit on the neat white shirt of the businessman sitting right next to him. This opened for a discussion, which eventually led Dad to sitting down for a home-cooked meal at this man's home with his family.
Dad's adventurous nature led him to start several small businesses throughout his life. Most were not especially profitable. His businesses, however, had other purposes, usually along the lines of keeping his sons busy so they would not cause trouble. Even by that modest measure, not necessarily successful. The first one was skate sharpening. With all 5 of us playing hockey on indoor and outdoor rinks, skating down the roads when they were iced, we were constantly sharpening our skates at 50 cents apiece. When the price went up to 75 cents, Dad knew this wasn't sustainable. In a shrewd move, he bought out the local skate sharpener, machine and all, and undercut all the other skate sharpeners by charging 50 cents. In truth, we had more of the previously mentioned dinner guests than paying customers, but the skate sharpener business saved Dad a lot of money.
Dad also started a honey farm in 1978. Together with some of Dad's brothers, we built a honey house, including building the trusses. To start the business, Dad paid us $1 to build a box and a super complete with frames. We worked at this after schools and on weekends. Mom and I extracted the honey into 45-gallon drums, which only Dad had the strength to roll onto the back of our half-ton truck. The older 3 boys were on the field bringing the boxes back to the honey house.
The truth is, we have Uncle Norman to thank for the honey business. Not because he was an apiarist himself, rather because he told Dad that my brothers and I would end up being preachers or pirates. And from what he was witnessing, it was a life at sea for all of us. This added to Dad's motivation to find something to keep us busy. And since there seemed to be only 2 options for our futures now, he also encouraged us toward ministry.
Later in life, there was one business venture that was, from a purely financial perspective, more successful than the skate sharpening business. That was the house on First Avenue. The town of Steinbach owned the house and let Con and Sheila live there for a time, rent-free, rather than have it sit vacant while it waited to be demolished to clear land for Linden Place. the town generously offered Con and Sheila the option to purchase the house for $1. But since Con and Sheila were students at Providence Seminary, and that day Con had gone out to buy a coffee for $1, he had no money to buy the house. Dad, seeing the opportunity, stepped in and purchased the house without even a counteroffer. Immediately after getting the title, Dad started charging Con and Sheila monthly rent. To which I chatted with Conroy earlier, and he said he had no bitterness or resentment. Then he bought a lot near Mitchell, built a basement, hired movers to transport the house onto the new basement, and sold it for a tidy profit. This was Dad. He wasn't necessarily strategic in his business, but he was always opportunistic. Dad was also resourceful. This is mine too. Dad was also resourceful. Mom and Dad couldn't afford to buy sticks for all 5 of his active hockey players. So we collected and brought home hockey sticks that had been broken along the shaft. Dad would splice the sticks together with glue, nails, and if necessary, tape. Occasionally, a coho would be married to a Sherwood. Our brother Barry recalls some of his games being on hold to clean up the broken stick and nails strewn all over the ice.
Probably the greatest adventure of Dad's life was our family's move to Abbotsford in 1981. With it, the opportunity to pastor the Grace Evangelical Mennonite Brethren Church. Although he had the final decision on this move, he carefully considered Mom's opinion and, around our kitchen table, asked his boys for input as well. Without any firm objections from anyone, he accepted the role, and in August we moved. The opportunity to be a senior pastor and to be close to his friend and mentor, Arnold Fast, who by then had also moved to Abbotsford, helped him decide. Some fond memories of Abbotsford. Dad playing organized church hockey with his sons and winning the league championship the second year. Calvin Block, the youth pastor who worked alongside Dad at Grace Church. Calvin and the church youth group were foundational in our faith formation. Together with his wife Lorinda, they have become dear and lifelong friends. And Christmas break, 1982. Dad took us on a family day trip to Manning Park to introduce us to downhill skiing. By mid-morning, this experience had turned into a novice skier, full-body contact, ski pole jabbing, temper flaring, snowplow mash-up set of races to the bottom of the hill. Dad may not have been the instigator, but he was a willing participant. If it wasn't for our bulky Manitoba parkas and skiing in jeans tucked into our rented ski boots, no one would have guessed we were a bunch of Mennonite pastors' kids, fresh from the prairies, learning to ski with our dad.
The relationship between a pastor and the church is complicated and can be painful. The conclusion of ministry in Abbotsford in 1986 was painful for Dad and the church. They never really talked about it, but it must have been a difficult day for Mom and Dad when they packed up the moving van on their own, except for the help of one man named Dan. He was a loner, an outsider that Dad had befriended. Although it would have been understandable, Mom and Dad never harbored bitterness toward or said a negative word about the church, individuals, or the situation. The 1990s was a decade of family expansion. That decade was all about the addition of daughter-in-laws and grandchildren. To celebrate Dad's 60th birthday in November 1996, Mom and Dad paid for a weekend at the Brandon Victoria Inn for the entire family. The next year, we met Thanksgiving weekend at the Regina Lodge to accommodate the brothers who lived in Alberta and BC and to renew the same senseless, roughhousing, rule-breaking on the hotel water slides that was inaugurated on the Manning Park ski hill. And so began the family tradition that remains today and is cherished by the grandchildren, the Coop family Regina Travel Lodge Thanksgiving weekend. Over the years, our Regina weekend has bonded us as a family. We have laughed, we have argued, we have cried, we've shared stories, we've wrestled, we've played lots of bingo, we've played games at Wascana Park, laser tagged, blessed each other, sang, and prayed.
Dad thoroughly enjoyed his 13 years as associate pastor here at Steinbach Evangelical Mennonite Church. He worked well with Arden Thiessen, the senior pastor, and their different strengths made them a good team. Dad initiated and led several groups like the Mall class and Chapter 13 that included people from a broad spectrum along the faith journey, those mature in their faith, together with those not interested in faith, but in search of belonging. Dad retired from pastoral ministry in 1999, only to go back into a series of interim pastoral roles in Swift Current, Menville, Enola, and Morris. He was appreciated for his friendliness, candor, and concern. Several years ago, Dad's memory began to fail noticeably. In 2018, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. During Dad's declining health, many people from his extended family, this church, and the surrounding community assisted, cared for, and visited him. Of note, there were some men who picked him up regularly for coffee or just for a drive in the country. We are so grateful for every small and large act of kindness toward him and us. You have truly been the body of Christ.
This disease affected all parts of Dad's life except his positive attitude and optimistic outlook, his ability to speak encouraging words, pray, and recite scripture. Dad spent a lifetime nurturing these characteristics. They are what we treasure most about our dad. Mom, your partnership with Dad has been astounding. You both faithfully loved and supported each other, and this was especially evident in his final years as you patiently answered his repeated questions and assisted him with daily routines that became too difficult for him, never showing anything but love, kindness, and patience. One of your granddaughters said, "I think that she speaks for all of us. Grandma is my favorite person in all the world. If I had half the patience of Grandma, I would be exceptional. We love you, Mom, and we walk with you."
Dad loved to run. In 2007, at the age of 70, and with Mom as his support team, Dad trained for and ran his first and only full marathon. Mom, my wife Susan, and our 3 children waited for him near the finish line in the University of Manitoba Stadium. With their faces pressed up against the chain link fence surrounding the rubberized track, the kids watched for Grandpa. The spectators had all dissipated, and only a scattering of volunteers were left cleaning up the remaining trash as Dad entered the stadium. In a marathon, even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. Dad, at age 70, was entirely spent. After 26 miles, his once young legs that would spin at 1,000 RPMs could barely turn over. As he walked and shuffled along to our corner of the track, the kids scrambled over the fence and eagerly sprinted to join Grandpa for his last few meters of the race. With the kids beside him, Dad's pace picked up along with his spirit. Upon completion, and I believe the pictures bear this out, Dad looked renewed. Dad labored these last few months, but his finish line is now behind him. And we, together with all the saints on earth below and in heaven above, declare that by faith in Jesus Christ and through the power of his death and resurrection, Dad is renewed.
Isaiah 40:30-31 says, "Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing."
Let's turn to song number 581. "It is Well With My Soul." 581. And let's stand to sing.
At funerals or memorial services like this, we often spend time looking back, recalling what has been. I think that is good, that is healthy, and you as a family have done a very fine job of it. Thank you. I'll just add one point yet to what you said. A few hours after I heard that Mel died, it dawned on me that I don't think I know of a single person who more perfectly emulated the Apostle Paul's attitude to the gospel ministry. The Apostle Paul wrote, "When I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, for I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." That was Mel Coop too. Now, if this is going to be a Christian service, then we have to not only look back, we also have to look forward. On the morning that Mel died, it may have been exactly while he was dying, I was reading a few of the Ascent Psalms. There is Psalm 126, where we read, "Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negeb. Those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves." This describes the typical life of an ancient Israelite farmer. But all the expositors agree it's really not about farming. This is about the life we live. It's a metaphor. The preacher is there who prays and studies and preaches and witnesses and waits and worries. By the way, I don't know if Mel ever worried, but I did. And worries and wonders, when will I ever be able to shout and laugh for joy? There are the parents who choose to raise a family, but then they groan and grieve over the bad choices their children make and wonder if ever their mouths will be full of joyful laughter. There's a student who studies and sweats and tries to grasp what is beyond her reach, but then reaches for more headache pills and wonders, what is the good of all this? Our Psalms promises after the tears and the weeping, there will come the joyful shouting. And we wonder, when will that be? Will it happen in 2020? Or will we have to wait for the next age to come? Which leads me directly to the biggest question of all time. Will there be a future for us after we are finished with this time? Oh, and by the way, I am talking today as a Christian believer to fellow Christian believers. If you feel yourself to be on the outside, listening in to something that seems strange to you, then I simply invite you to start right now to think about joining us in our Christian faith. In the meantime, please keep on listening as I explore the future with you. Now, we have lots of wise people who help us figure out the future. If we wonder about the future of the universe, there are hundreds of climatologists these days who are ready to scare us to death, led by a little lady from Sweden. If we wonder how the stock market will do this year, there's all kinds of advice for free or for a fee. Most of it's wrong, sometimes it's right. If we wonder what's the future of the Progressive Conservative Party here in Canada, there are people who make it their life's job to try to figure that out and inform us. If we wonder if the Jets will make the playoffs, we go to the online news stories or to TV. Oh, by the way, I added this last one specifically for Mel's sake. I don't know if Mel ever preached a sermon without using at least one sports illustration. And now I have done it in his honor. Okay, here we go. But if we wonder about our future after death, then we are completely at the mercy of God. Either we will let God enlighten us, or we will remain in the darkness of guesses and speculations and foggy skepticism. Because human eyes cannot see beyond the curtain that comes down across the stage of life when a person takes the last breath. It's a mystery. a mystery that is as old as the history of humankind. As long as people have lived and thought, they have wondered about the possibility of living after this living is done. It's very fortunate that it was already a pressing issue in the days when the New Testament was written. And so the New Testament deals with it, not only with tentative hints or vague suggestions. No, the New Testament is at many points quite bold, decisive, emphatic. It makes declarations about the hope to come. This hope of our resurrection is usually connected with the fact of Christ's resurrection. First, there had to be a demonstration that people could see and experience, and then the doctrine was built upon that. The writers of the New Testament exult in their hope. God has now revealed his plan to them. Resurrection, of course. God has done it once, and he will do it again. They moved directly from the resurrection of Christ, which they had witnessed or had heard about from reliable friends, to the resurrection that we can anticipate. Listen to this. For if we have been united with him in a death like his, we will certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. That comes from Romans 6:5. And in 8:11 I read, he who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also. 1 Corinthians 6:14, God raised the Lord and will also raise us by his power. 2 Corinthians 4:14, we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus will also raise us with Jesus. And the Apostle Peter, not wishing to be left behind by his more famous friend, starts his letter by rejoicing over the living hope that we now have through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And here before me I have now 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Paul's dialogue with the Greek skeptics of his day. He imagines himself before a person who can't understand all this supernatural stuff. And he starts out by presenting his case, the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He's convinced it really happened. The man was dead, the corpse was buried, but was seen alive after that by many witnesses, alive in a new body. If Paul had not been convinced of that, he would never have started preaching, and he would never have written this chapter. And from the confident hope that the apostle announces, I want to draw out now 3 very important convictions that I ask you to accept. And remember, please. First is this, verse 22. All will be made alive in Christ. Simple as that. But some people say it's too vague. It's hard to know how far the promise goes. Does it say that everybody will be raised to eternal life in heaven with him? But others read the next verse and notice there that it speaks of all those who belong to Christ. All those who are united or will be united by faith with Jesus Christ will live. That's the promise. Now, the New Testament does not tell us very much about how the life of eternity will be lived. What is clear is that our faith relationship with the Lord does not end when death ends us. The Bible doesn't really explain this strange thing called resurrection, which shows up over and over in the New Testament. And maybe the most helpful thing the New Testament has for us is to tell us simply to look at Jesus. What we mean when we talk about our hope has already happened once, visibly. Paul speaks of it as the receiving of a new body, which I suggest means that just as this body you have, which brought you to church here today, which is designed to live here in frosty, cold Manitoba, provided you have a warm car and enough good clothing, that body will be replaced with a new body, which is designed for the eternal spiritual dimension of the future, alive in Christ. The second very important point is this. The resurrection has already begun. It has already started. One man was dead, buried, and was seen again here and there. You see, we teach in our churches that Christ came to save us from our sins. But here we discover in this chapter that Christ came to give us hope. You see, we keep on dying. And even though we give ourselves to Jesus and then give ourselves to live for Jesus, we keep on dying. But God, in his infinite love for his people, gave us one substantive reason to keep on hoping in this dying world. Jesus was raised visibly. The tomb was empty. He showed up here and there and then had breakfast with them on the beach. Humankind needed that because we all keep on dying. Paul talks about Christ as being the first fruits. That's the word he borrowed from the Old Testament. It means that with Christ's resurrection, God's program for the future of his people has begun. The raising of the dead has already been inaugurated. It has started, and it works. One man has already shown up after death in the new shape of an eternal person. And I think I have one more point. Yes, one more. I said 3. The third one is this. I'm going to read it in verse 25 and 26. For we must reign, he, that is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. And the last enemy to be destroyed is death. All the enemies will be abolished. You see, I'm not surprised that many people who observe this world and follow its events carefully conclude that God does not seem to be a very good manager. Some even conclude that as far as the evidence goes, God must be mean and cruel and malicious. I'm not surprised, although I am disappointed, when they then conclude that there can be no God. I remind them then that this world is not the way God created it. This is now a rebel world. We live in the midst of a worldwide catastrophic uprising. But the emergence of Jesus from the dead means that all troublesome powers are going to be doomed. Whatever the shape the rebel forces have, human or demonic or natural, this rebellion, their rebellion, will not last. Their freedom to spoil and destruct is going to be terminated. They will lose their function in the age to come, because then God will be all in all. It says so here in verse 28. And the good news of defeat of the enemies includes the most prevalent enemy of all, death. There is not a household in this world that does not or will not experience it. Comes to every one of us eventually. And I'm glad that the Bible speaks of death as an enemy. That's how it always seems to me. I don't like it. Death is depressing. I told some friends here on Sunday morning, I have never yet enjoyed a funeral service, and I wouldn't enjoy this one. But we'll do it joyfully. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. You can figure that out. Death is depressing, yeah. There's nothing nice or beautiful or pleasant about death. I was actually glad when I was in Mel's room and someone said it was either Mary or Susan. This Alzheimer is a bummer. Good, I thought. That's the truth. That's realistic. It's a bummer because it's slowly ruining the mind and the body of a wonderful man. And it's a bummer because the only way to get out of it is by dying. That's the way it is. Oh, yeah, I know. Sometimes a family talks about how peacefully and nicely the mother slipped away into eternity. But that beautiful bedside scene was preceded by the gradual weakening and disabling and deterioration of a person who was meant for living. Finally, life was so difficult that death seemed like a mercy. However, God is the author and creator of life. His will for humans is life. He wants people to live forever the way Mel lived this life, with health, vitality, energy, creativity, exuberance, and joy. Death and everything that precedes it is a foreign element in God's creation. It has been introduced by a foreigner, the enemy, who has invaded God's creation and intends to wreck it as far as possible. Death is the devil's doing. That's what Hebrews 2:14 at least says very clearly. However, the resurrection of Christ presents us with another evidence of the beautiful, fantastic, amazing grace of God. We can encounter the enemy named death, sometimes very suddenly, sometimes after weeks of waiting, and deal with it without losing our composure or our faith or our peace. In fact, we may even at this point feel a deeper sense of serenity than ever before. So, I need to sum it up. I realize that this whole idea of having a new body, a new life, that'll be totally different than this, that'll last and go on forever, is so strange. It is so contrary to everything that we study in our textbooks about how the world works and how our bodies work and so on. It's so unearthly that it's hard to know how to think of it when a family person dies or when we think of our own dying. How will it happen? How can it happen? How or when will we move from this life to the next? The apostle uses 58 verses in 1 Corinthians 15 to discuss it. But when I reach the end, I am still profoundly confused. Fortunately, a few months after the apostle wrote this, he wrote another book we call 2 Corinthians. And there in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, the apostle gives us an example of how he thinks about it. Let me walk you through it very quickly, ad-libbing a little bit to make it more interesting than he made it. He says, this life in which I now live is like living in a tent. But the tent is getting old. It's getting worn down. It's actually quite kaput. I'm waiting to move on into the great house that is waiting for me. And then he changed the pictures. And these clothes I'm wearing, I'm tired of them. They're worn out. I'm waiting to get out of these old clothes. Oh, he says, not because I want to be naked, because I want to be dressed up in a much better way. You follow it? And then he says this wonderful line, because what is mortal will be swallowed up by life. That is my aha moment. We're all mortals, and mortals die. But he doesn't say that they die. He says mortals get swallowed up by life. Life takes over when this life is over. That's what he says. And then the second line, a few verses later. When we will be away from the body, that's when we die, right? Then we leave the body behind us. When we will be away from the body, we will be at home with the Lord. I suggest these two lines sum up our hope. They include everything, from the Old Testament to Jesus to the apostles to the book of Revelation. With these two promissory lines, I cannot think that there will be a 2,000-year-long hiatus of nothingness or deadness, such as some of my first teachers taught me, and such as some of my theology books teach me. No, this seems immediate. There's this life, and then there's the next. That's how it seems to be understood by the Apostle Paul. Which leads me then to think. This is a guess. I think it's a thoughtful guess. That when Jesus hung on the cross, he probably moved into the new resurrection life of the future the instant he cried out, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And this leads me to wonder and suggest that most likely Mel was resurrected the minute you saw him take his last breath. I've been at that bedside scene, that deathbed scene, a number of times. The end, the last breath, always seems like a holy, holy minute. Not because the person is finally dead, no, but because we are there as close to eternity as it is possible to be. Jesus showed up on the third day, and they met him. We don't know yet when we will meet Mel, but we will. And I expect that when we'll meet him, he'll be even more fun than he was originally. Anyway, death has been stripped of its power to terrorize us. Because Jesus has been here, our lives have now been enriched with hope. We can look forward to something that cannot be seen, that cannot be described, that can't be proved. As Paul says right here in this chapter, 2 Corinthians 5, when it comes to these things, we have to walk by faith, not by sight. We walk by faith. We believe it. We hold to it. We sing about it because Jesus has been here. And through him, God has revealed to us what is the wonderful future when life here is over. Jesus came here to introduce us to it and then to welcome us. And that welcome is being stretched out by Jesus to every one of you. Come unto me, you, and receive my gift of eternal life. Come unto me and rest, and prepare for spending eternity with me. That's the invitation of Jesus. We will pray. Our Father, I don't know what these guests here feel like saying at this point, but I feel like saying on behalf of all of them, thank you, Father in heaven, for your grace and your love and your thoughtfulness that you allowed Jesus to give us this vision into what the future will be for us. We are grateful for that, and we praise you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let's turn our hymn books to song number 643, When We All Get to Heaven. What a day of rejoicing that will be. 643, if you are able, let's stand to sing. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus. Sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, we'll prepare for us a place. When we all
As we conclude the service this afternoon, just want to invite you again all to join us in the fellowship hall immediately after our dismissal here. We'll dismiss the family out these doors, and then if the rest of the congregation would just wait until the ushers come and dismiss you, and then we will see you in the fellowship hall. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearance. God bless. Thank you for coming.